Okay. Yeah, so thank you again for joining us to talk about some of Helene's effects on the Hendersonville water treatment facility. To start off, I just wanted you to tell me a little about your position.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the utilities director for the utility in Hendersonville. We serve, I think you saw on our website, we serve about 80,000 people water across Henderson County, a little bit of Buncombe County. We even sell water to Saluda in Polk County. So we're a regional water provider. And on the sewer side, a little bit smaller, mostly within Hendersonville city limits. I think about a little over 80% of our customers are in the city, and the rest are in outlying areas. Um, so I'm over the basically just the operations of the utility, budgeting, admin, personnel, capital projects, just kind of oversee our different divisions there.
Yeah, so thank you. And then throughout the storm, we wanted to highlight that the water treatment facility for Hendersonville never lost water service for their customers. Is that correct?
Mhm. Yeah, the water plant remained operational the entire time. We did lose power, I think, for probably 4 or 5 days at our plant, but we have a generator that allowed us to maintain operations. Um, while we did continue to produce water for the first probably 30 hours, we were limited on the amount of water that we were receiving. We have a couple different water sources. Two of them are within the Pisgah National Forest. That's the North Fork and Bradley Creek reservoirs. Those were maintained service the entire time. The water from those sources flows by gravity. It just flows to the plant. So we were able to maintain those sources, but we did temporarily lose our Mills River main pump station. It's next to Valley Ag. That location was flooded. The Mills River came up and kind of started impacting that station and kind of got into the electrical panels. So we were forced to turn it off for about 30 hours. So while we did maintain treatment operations, we weren't able to put out as much water as the system was demanding from just normal demands, but also there were a lot of water leaks in the system that kind of, you know, just drained the system or more water was going out of the system than what was coming in the system for about 30 hours.
Right. Okay. Okay. And so you mentioned there's multiple sources you pull from for your water.
Mhm.
Do you think that is what allowed this facility to continue to provide water compared to other systems that lost water?
Sure. Yeah. Having the multiple sources definitely builds extra resiliency. For source water. Um, would like to mention that the Mills River intake. That's a pumping station. Um, we were able to start it back up about 30. It was only down for about 30 hours. So we have a generator at that site too. So even when we didn't have power at that facility for the several days, we were still able to pull water from that source once the floodwaters receded. Um, and we're also building a fourth water intake right now on the French Broad. It's almost completed. So yeah, certainly having the redundant sources is very important for extreme weather like flooding, but also on the other end of the spectrum, drought. It gives us some options on where to get our source water.
That's awesome. Um,
Hmm.
and do you mind? I know there's a lot of details in how the water goes from being raw to running in somebody's household, but would you mind giving a brief overview of that process for people?
Sure. Yeah. So once the water comes from the sources, essentially water treatment. Um, all the water comes in. It's dosed with some chemicals called coagulants that cause the sediment in the water to clump together. So those clumps get bigger and bigger. and that allows them to kind of settle to the bottom of a tank. The process is called sedimentation. Um, the water from the top of, or the clean water from the top of the sedimentation tanks, then goes through filters. Our filters are a sand, anthracite, and gravel mixture, so that those filters will polish any additional dirt and sediment in the water. It'll filter that out, and then after the filters, the water is dosed with chlorine as a disinfectant and some other various chemicals to adjust pH and do corrosion control. There's a few different chemicals that we dose, and then after that, it's stored at the plant. There's a big uh, water tank, if you will, just to give a little bit of finished water storage, and then the water is just pumped out into the distribution system.
So I know that all your customers, none of them are under a boil water advisory now. But a lot of people in Asheville are still dealing with that, and they're, the folks at that water treatment facility are pretty busy. So we're just wondering if you'd be able to walk us through like what the boil water advisory means for the people who are still dealing with that, what causes it, the conditions that cause it, and so forth.
Right. So we have some good information on our website. If you want to read there about our recommendations during a boil water advisory, but essentially we call them system pressure advisories. But really, the recommendation from a system pressure advisory, out of precaution, is to boil water before consuming it. And again, it's precautionary. So anytime that the water system or a section of the water system experiences low or no water pressure, out of precaution, we recommend to boil water, because that low pressure, no pressure, anytime there's a break, it causes that. There's the potential for contaminants or bacteria from entering into the water supply or into the water system. So out of precaution, that's when we would recommend that. I think in an event like this, a lot of our pipe breaks were in creeks, or some of them were in creeks where, streams had just washed the infrastructure away. So in those areas at the time, it was very likely and possible that stream water, creek water was getting into the water pipes, especially if there was no pressure. The pressure kind of pushes that water from entering the system, but when you don't have pressure, it can flow in. So in an event like this, it's pretty likely that did occur. And then once those pipe breaks are fixed, we do a lot of flushing of the system to kind of get that stuff out. But also, as mentioned earlier, we do dose our water with chlorine as a disinfectant. So there is a chlorine residual in the water. So in the event that any sort of bacteria or contamination would enter the finished water that's treated, the chlorine would kind of kill the bacteria from getting into the water. So it's safe to drink. Essentially, it was that's kind of an overview of why those are done.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, thank you for going over that. Um, and going forward, I guess, what do you think is going to be the biggest obstacle for the water treatment plant, post-Helene?
Mm-hmm. Um, the water plant maintained operations substantially well throughout the event. We were very fortunate to maintain operations, and we never had to shut down that facility. I think that's largely due to the redundancy in the sources, but also the redundancy in having generators at these facilities to run during power outages. I don't really have a lot of things that come to mind directly on the water supply side of the house. We've already done a few things at the Mills River pump station specifically to elevate some of those critical electrical components. Those have been the ones that were impacted by the water have already been raised several feet. So again, this was some folks are saying it's greater than a 1,000-year storm event. So the equipment that was damaged, was still above mapped floodplains, but we went ahead and with replacement took the opportunity to harden that infrastructure a little bit. Um, I think our biggest overall changes across the utility, just on the entire water supply system. Um, we've got generators at a lot of our sites, but we are looking at ways where we can build additional redundancy in the system or resiliency, whether that means creating areas that may be served by a single water pipe now, large areas that are served by one pipe, um, putting in additional pipes that serve areas and looping those connections for as backup plan, but also to improve hydraulics in the system. Um, we're also looking at improving our communications protocol, specifically, with the outage of cell and internet. That was probably one of the bigger impacts to the operation shortly thereafter and during restoration. So we're looking at going back into investing into some more conventional communication technologies, radios that are more reliable during extreme events. And then we're also on a staff level during an event, staff wear many, many different hats, are required to maybe do roles that aren't in their normal job descriptions. So we're definitely working on providing some additional cross training for our staff so that they are prepared and equipped to handle a variety of issues in the future. Those were the high points that we've identified.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great to hear you guys are working on so many more projects to make the facility more climate resilient. So sounds like you've already done a lot too. So that's great. Well, I think that was kind of covering everything that I wanted to get to.
Okay.
Did you have anything that you wanted to add, put out there to people? Any comments?
I was just going to show you our French Broad River intake. That's a new one. That's a $23.5 million water intake on the French Broad that was almost complete. And it was built at the 500-year flood elevation. A lot of the which ends up being like over 14 feet above the ground on the banks of the French Broad, and we saw the water come up about 16 to 17 feet. However, a lot of the electrical and core components were, they don't sit right on the ground. So
Mhm.
I think a big takeaway and something to maybe consider, especially if you're talking about climate resiliency. I don't know how long you've been at the partnership, but last fall we were in a significant drought in the area, and we had to put our water customers under mandatory water use restrictions.
Mhm.
At the same time, really, that French Broad River intake was really built for a drought resiliency measure. So one thing that I find interesting is within 9 to 10 months, you go from extreme drought to an extreme flood, and having the infrastructure in place to handle both those extremes, right? We seem to be getting a lot of extreme weather events, and I think the message to get out to the customer base after this event is how vital investments in the critical infrastructure are, so that we keep getting these extreme events more frequently. We're still able to provide water service to the community for public health and commerce. So that's a really important thing to to get across, and the investments in this stuff is not cheap, right? It costs a lot of money to harden this infrastructure in a lot of cases, but I think the investment is definitely worth it.
Right.